So, when I was working in an office full time as a fashion designer, what I mostly did on a day to day basis was I I'm very technical, so I did a lot of what's called swatch development, where I basically am designing custom fabrics either for our in house brand or for our clients. And I actually, it's two ways I normally did it. One way is if I had a sample of the fabric and there were just a few changes that the client wanted to make, then I could just, in Photoshop, change some things around and send it with some comments and send it to a factory to knit out some options. The other way was that I actually did it myself. We had a sort of like this hand knitting machine in my office where I worked. And it's sort of like it's a machine, but it's not an auto knit machine. You actually have to physically move the carriage with your hand, and that knits one row every time you move it. And I use this to develop new fabrics for clients or for our own in house brands. The other thing I did a lot was I did sort of the logistics of the knitting construction when making a garment. So with knitwear, you don't often cut the fabric. You actually, as the fabric is knitting out, it's shaped to the shape of a garment. So say I'm making the front bodice of a sweater. And if it's going to be fitted, then as the fabric's knitting out, you're going to shape it. It's going to be shaped coming in, coming out at the waist, and then the armholes are going to be shaped, and also the neck. So all those things are shaped while the fabric is actually being knitted. And what I also did a lot of was I was sort of like this middle communication person between the technician who programs the auto knit machines and other designers, knitwear designers. Because I have a lot of technical knowledge and the capabilities of the knitting machine, and a lot of knitwear designers don't necessarily have a big understanding of what the machines can do. So my job was to say if the knitwear designer designed something and then sent it to the factory and the technician was like, no, this isn't possible, we can't do this. It was my job to explain why and to also give suggestions on other options. Because normally the technician is maybe someone that doesn't speak English as a first language. Maybe, they're in factories, maybe in China, Bangladesh, or somewhere else. And the designer tends to be someone that speaks English as a first language. And so I would sort of advocate for both sides. For the technician, if it's something that I knew wasn't possible and he was right, I'd say, okay, yes, this technician is right. This isn't possible to do on the auto machine, or maybe it's just way too expensive. It takes a really long time to knit, so it's won't fit in our price range. So my job was to give other options and say, well, I can see you want a lot of texture. So we can get a really similar look like this, but we can do this other stitch that is very possible on the machine, and it knits a lot quicker. It's a lot cheaper. So that was my job, to communicate with the designer. And on the other side, my job was also to advocate for the designer. If the designer gives something to the technician and the technician says no, and I'm supposed to review it, and I'll decide if it's possible on the machine or not. And if I know it's possible, and maybe the technician just isn't as experienced as myself, sometimes you get technicians that are new and they don't know a lot. It's my job to advocate for the designer and say, I know this is possible on the machine, and have a little bit of patience and explain to the technician how it's possible to knit that particular stitch or garment on the machine. So my job had a lot to do with being knowing the abilities of the knitting machine.